However, I don't need to report that Nigel Farage says his party has all the momentum in British politics. Why not? Because he said it here himself. This is Reform UK. They've now topped a national opinion poll for the first time in the wake of the sentencing of the Southport killer, according to this article which was printed yesterday. We're seeing that they're now on 26%, Conservatives on 23%, and Labour third on 22%. Can we trust the poll? Do we think that this is the momentum that Nigel talks about? Has support for reform indeed eclipsed both Conservative and Labour? Well, Lord Robert Hayward, Conservative pollster and peer, joins me now. Lord Hayward, very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us here on Talk. Is Nigel Farage to be believed when he says that he's got all the momentum in British politics?
He would say that, wouldn't he? The answer is no. The opinion polls are all over the place at the moment, basically showing that there are three parties contending for leadership. The latest opinion poll, which I'm sure Nigel wouldn't want to refer to, actually shows Labour in the lead. But they are snapshots of the people they're surveying. There's no question that reform has very substantial momentum at this point because they're starting from a very low level in comparison with the other two parties. But it's not all in one direction. It's a combination of three different parties vying for leadership, vying for a position.
And I suppose it's parties which are vying to be the opposition. Labour have not had the greatest start to any leadership of the country that I've ever experienced in my 54 years of life. In fact, I've never seen such a disastrous start from any political party in any position of power. And that comes with the likes of Liz Truss and indeed others who made such a horlicks of it. I'm absolutely astonished at the decisions that Keir Starmer and indeed Rachel Reeves and the team are taking. That having been said, I was in Parliament on Wednesday for Prime Minister's Question Time. I saw Keir Starmer. He was efficient with his responses. I thought Kemi Badenoch was utterly weak. Does she have a single chance of winning over the British public to become that main opposition?
Yes, he has a chance. But there's an interesting subtext to the opinion polls. I was looking at them before I came on here this morning. And there's a very high proportion of the electorate who are actually saying they don't know how they're going to vote at the next election. It's this disenchantment with politics in general. I'd also say that, interesting about your comments with regards to Kemi Badenoch's appearance at pre-MQs, there are others who took the view that her concentration on education has resulted in a government announcement the next day that they're changing the incoming legislation. So each person's perception of current politics is somewhat different.
Well, interesting that you say that, but it was interesting also that Keir Starmer at that particular exchange said that the change that was going to be announced was already in place, and he discussed it and announced it at that particular point in time. But Kemi Badenoch, interesting that, you know, she focused on education at that particular point, when surely everybody should be focusing on the lack of economic growth. The Conservatives, however, in their 14 years in power, they didn't really do what they said they were going to do. They didn't lower taxation in the way that they could or should have done. They didn't necessarily inject the economy, and they went after non-doms and various other people that arguably took then we saw people take fright from the UK with their money and their business. Have the Conservatives got to reinvent themselves to get themselves back up in the polls, do you think?
Oh, yes, no question about it. They've got to. If there was one theme about the last general election, it wasn't we want a particular party. It was we don't want a particular party, and that particular party was the Conservatives. And you don't change that public perception in a matter of weeks or a matter of months. Now, Kemi Badenoch's made some comments this last 2 weeks, which are quite interesting, and she's begun to try and move away, but you can't change a public perception in a short period of time. She's going to have to take a year or 2 years to achieve that.
You say that, but then in the 6 months since the election, Nigel Farage seems to have added at least 10 points to his popularity, if not more, by being very clear and very strident with his views. So there's an argument to say that if Kemi Badenoch came out with some policy, that would be a good thing. But she's refused to do so, either because she thinks thinks that other people will steal it, or alternatively, they haven't got it. And that's part of the problem, is that until or unless people know what you stand for and know what you're going to do, they're not going to come and flock to you.
Yeah, I think I can understand why people say that, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that in 2013, 2014, UKIP, in its previous guise, was recording very close to the same opinion poll levels that Reform now are. So it's not something that we haven't been to previously. The problem for Nigel Farage, yes, he's enormously popular with certain people, and he's a brilliant populist. I love being interviewed by him, but he's very much, to use a standard expression, Marmite. People have very strong views one way or the other. They either like him or they loathe him.
But isn't that what you need in the quality of a leader? Isn't that what you need in the quality of a leader? And part of the problem that Kemi Badenoch has is that she's kind of not Marmite. People don't really care. Some people don't know who she is. She hasn't necessarily put herself on the map. And she's kind of neither this nor that, bit wishy-washy.
I think that's a fair comment to some people, but there are others, which is why, though, you have this high number of don't knows in the electorate at the moment, who are saying, well, it's quite right, the election's not going to be for 4 years or so, and therefore let's take time to get to know the people concerned, the different parties, because as you just put your finger on it, the Tory party has got to move away from the negative attitude that the public at large had of it, as arising from Partygate and Liz Truss.
What do your polls say about the things which the Conservatives should tackle or should have at the front of their either mantra or in terms of policy?
Just a clarification, they're not my polls. I just spend my sad time reading everybody else's polls. What is quite clear, and it's always the case, is that the economy, stupid, is the top issue for the public in general. Then come two particular issues broadly. One is immigration and the other is the National Health Service. There was a period a few months ago where all three were closed, but the economy, because of the problems you identified in relation to Keir Starmer's government, has moved up again as clearly the biggest issue. Climate change was a big issue. It's still important to certain people, particularly the younger population, but it's not on a par with immigration and the NHS now.
And just finally to you very briefly, if one's looking ahead at whether it's elections, local or national, are we heading into an era where unpredictability and strange results is what we should expect?
Absolutely. The last election had huge numbers of seats that were won by very small margins, and I would expect that to continue as long as you do have three major parties vying for a popular vote and the Lib Dems concentrating on particular seats.
There we go. Well, it looks as if we're heading into even more interesting times than we have been in before. Lord Robert Hayward, Conservative pollster and peer, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk.